Member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, of course, it is a procedure of this place that post an election, the House comes together, the Parliament is called, and the Governor-General addresses the Parliament about the agenda of the newly elected government at the time. So I acknowledge in making this speech that it's actually quite some months since that occurred, but I think it is an important opportunity for members of this place to talk about the issues that confront the nation, the agenda of the government elected at the time of the election, and to express the views of their constituency on those matters. So I want to take the opportunity to do that today. I want to start by saying that personally I was very impressed, and I think it was a wonderful thing that the Governor-General did when he did the welcome and acknowledgement of country in the Ngunnawal language. It was a really lovely thing to see the Governor-General of this nation speak those words in the land of the original inhabitants of the place on which we meet and who we acknowledge as our Parliament opens each day. It is important to acknowledge that in his address outlining the priorities for the government that there were a range of matters that the newly elected government indicated it would take action on in this area of Indigenous Australians, significantly identifying that the first Aboriginal Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Mr Ken Wyatt, had been appointed, and I welcome that, as I think many people would have done. I was a bit disappointed that the government's ambitions in terms of a voice to Parliament from our first Indigenous Australians was a fairly weak commitment. I do think it is really important that, having had the First Peoples of Nation gather at Uluru to express to the Parliament of the nation their desire for a structure to create a voice to Parliament directly from our First Peoples, needs far more commitment and progress. And so I think that it is something that I was particularly proud of in Labor's platform at the election, in that commitment to that statement from the heart of from Uluru. But I think it was a very gracious indication by the Governor-General of his respect that he pays to Indigenous people. I also want to just, in this comment, that the Governor-General and his wife, Mrs Hurley, I was able to join for luncheon last Friday in my electorate. They were in the electorate to speak at the Mental Health in the Workplace luncheon. That's a regular feature of our calendar in Wollongong. This year it was raising funds for the One Door Illawarra service and some of the particular programs that they run in specifics around people obviously with mental health challenges, and they have a wonderful clubhouse there, and the chair, local chair, Professor Frank Dean, and Deputy Chair Janine Cullen have done a great job in not only running that service but keeping opportunities for community members who want to do some support able to do that. And this luncheon is one of the ways that they deliver on that. And the Governor-General gave I thought, fantastic speech to that gathering about the importance of workplaces being somewhere that people with mental health issues feel supported and able to continue to contribute. I will say, I'm sure I'm not telling stories out of school because there were several hundred people at the luncheon, that Mrs Hurley led us in a rounding rendition of a song that she'd written for the One Door Mental Health Services nationally, and You Are My Sunshine as well, and it was just a really lovely thing of her to do, and I thought that the room was very moved and touched by her contribution as well. So the Governor-General's speech outlined a range of areas on which the newly elected government was seeking to take action, and I want to address those in the time that I have available to me. The first area that speech went to was the economy and tax reform. In particular, the government outlined some of its priorities around managing the economy. I have to say, several months down the track, that I think there needs to be, as they used to say when I wrote school reports, much greater effort required. Only this week we've seen the RBA board minutes released. They tell us that economic growth is the lowest in a decade, that wages are stagnant and that employment is fragile. The reality for so many people in our community is that those who have work know that their wages have been stagnant and simply not keeping up with the costs of living for too long now, and that the government of the day doesn't have any solutions to that. And it really is a significant area that government must engage with. Those who are only in a less reliable attachment to the workforce, I'm thinking of people who are in casual employment, contract employment, are increasingly seeing their capacity to earn an income because of this wage stagnation undermined. So it's always difficult when you're a casual or a contract worker to manage the family income, the family budget, or your own budget if you're individual. And this overall impact on the workforce is meaning that it's even more difficult and more unreliable for people who are in casual contract type of work arrangements. And of course there are the many people who want to get into the workforce and are dealing with things like the retail sector, which is hugely important in my own area, suffering from the effects of a severe lack of confidence in the economy. These are real issues facing people in my electorate, as they are across the country, and they are an important part of the story on economic management. And I certainly think, as I said, the government needs to do better. The second area that the report went to was regulatory reform and industrial relations. The government makes a great deal of focus on what it calls lawlessness in the union movement. But I want to say that the most concerning stories that come out in my own local area are actually about exploitation of workers. And indeed, only last week, my state colleague, the member for Wollongong, Paul Scully, had the state shadow minister in Wollongong to talk to students at the University of Wollongong about some of the sorts of exploitation that they've seen of young people in the workplace. This is certainly something that our local Labor Council, the South Coast Labor Council and affiliated unions have been doing a great deal of work on. And the Illawarra Mercury reported that one of the students, Zach Jory, talked about what had happened. He'd been underpaid about $20,000. He'd worked long hours, didn't get penalty rates or overtime while he was employed for more than 2 years. The international studies student unionised with his fellow workers, and he ended up settling with the company, but for a fraction of the wages that he had lost. And this story, as told to Paul Scully and the Shadow Minister Daniel Mookie, is not unusual, and we hear it consistently. And I think for young people entering the workforce to have their early experiences to be ones of exploitation is really unacceptable, and something that should far more be the focus of attention by this government rather than just the union bashing that they tend to